I'm about to give you a comprehensive free tutorial on the features and operations of the Rane System One standalone console. By the end of this, you'll understand everything there is to know about it. I'll show you every feature, I'll help you troubleshoot common issues, I'll give you practical tips for using it at gigs and in home practice, I'll show you all the ways you can get music into it and much more. Now this is a highly capable piece of kit. It's got pretty much everything you'll find on a laptop system, including stems, but in a standalone. You can play from USB drives and SD cards and built-in hard drive. It's got cloud services. You can use it as an external controller with DJ software. You can add microphones and an auxiliary input and much more. Plus, its unique vertical screen, just like its scratch mixer layout and its motorized platters, will appeal to open format and performance DJs particularly. This detailed walkthrough will really help you to get to grips with it, so do check out our table of contents. You can hit Ctrl and F or Command and F depending on your computer. Just type in the keyword, and if we've got a chapter marker for it, it'll be highlighted. Hit the time code and it's going to jump you straight to that part of the video. Now this is designed to be a video manual, so do bookmark it so you can come back as often as you like. I mean, it's nearly 2 hours long, so it's definitely designed to be treated like a reference. Now, if you're a pure beginner or you're an intermediate DJ, I do have a word of warning. This video alone is not going to be enough for you to play great DJ sets. There's many skill sets and pieces of knowledge that you have to assemble to crush it as a DJ. So I can teach you today about this piece of gear, but if you don't understand the rest of the gear that you need, or how to find and organize digital music, or the basics of counting and timing and beat mixing, or the skills of programming and performing a DJ set, or how to achieve success as a DJ, whether that's as a hobby DJ or even for a career, of course you're going to be frustrated. When I started back in '92, we didn't have YouTube. We had to learn by trial and error. I learned on cheap turntables and a crappy Gemini mixer, and it took me years of frustration before I got good. I remember nearly giving up several times. I'm so glad I didn't, of course, because I stuck with it. DJing has become my career. It's brought me decades of joy. So I'm going to make that promise to you. Yes, if you're new to this, you're going to run into some frustrations, but my job is to get you through them. The teaching style we use here at Digital DJ Tips in the school is to focus on the end result, on actually getting you quickly to be able to play DJ sets that you're proud of. That's where the real magic happens. That's where the real learning happens. It's not in your bedroom or your home studio, it's performing. Whether that's at parties, in clubs, live streaming, sharing DJ mixes, whatever you're dreaming of. Now, if you like what you see here, I've got 2 extra resources for you. First, we've got a crash course for beginners or for those new to digital DJ. It's called a Complete DJ course, where you'll learn all you need to know to be able to DJ like a pro fast, and even better, it works not only for the System One, but for all DJ gear. Once you follow the course, you'll be able to play confidently on anything. The video course is about 80 lessons long, and you get access to me personally as your tutor. It's a phenomenal investment in your DJing. You can get it as a single purchase or as part of our all access package. I'll put a link to the course below. Now, another great resource is our global best-selling book on how to DJ, Rock the Dance Floor, which is a fantastic primer on those 5 big areas of DJing: gear, music, mixing, performing, and success. It's in its 2nd edition. It's helped tens of thousands of DJs to get started. Again, there's a link in the description, but I'll also tell you how you can get a free copy of my book later on. For now though, we have got quite a lot to get through, so I think we should get started. Let's talk about how you build the turntables, because they come like this. They come with both turntables. I've already done this one, but both turntables need assembling. The clever thing here is that this part here is the motorized part, and the spindle in the middle actually moves independently. So the whole mechanism we're about to add to this unit is the bit that allows you to play the music by letting the motor turn the spindle around, but then grab the spindle using the part that's built into this, which is the bit I'm going to show you now, the vinyl part, in order that when you want to scratch and when you want to manipulate the music, you can take control away from the motor and do it yourself, just like on a real turntable. It's really clever. So here is exactly how it works. We're going to put the platter over the top of this so that these two holes here line up with these two pins here. So the easiest way I find to do that is to put your fingers through the two holes and to look where your holes are here and kind of line your fingers up with those holes, and normally you're going to get it. There you go, I got it right first time. It's actually very easy to do that. Now once you've done that, the next thing we need to do, we put our slip mat on. Now you can put the plastic discs that come with it underneath the slip mat if you want the slip mat to be looser, but start off with just the slip mat and see where you go from there. Now this little pin here that you can see, there's just a tiny little hole. See that? If I move around where my finger is, that little hole there needs to be lined up with another little hole which is in the center of here. So in the center of here, I'm pushing in this tiny little pin. And this tiny little pin is moving a tiny little bit that clips into the part that we looked at there. And so in order to do that, it's actually quite easy. You grab this, you put your finger on there and hold that in, and then you pop it over the top, doesn't matter where. Now once you've done that, it's not clipped into place yet, but it's easy enough to click it into place by holding the spindle and turning the vinyl. So listen. There you go. That's now clicked into place. And what that means is that when you grab this vinyl with your fingers and move it, it will move the spindle, and that's what controls the music. As I say, very clever. As with all Engine DJ units, it's advisable to have the desktop software. This is what it looks like. Get that on your laptop. And this is where you're going to prepare your music. It's the best place to analyze your music ahead of time. The unit itself can do all that stuff, but it's a lot quicker and you can get a lot more done at once if you prepare it all ahead of time on the laptop software. Once you've done that, you plug in some kind of removable media, or you can use Dropbox. We'll talk about that later, but removable media is definitely the best. I've got an SD card plugged in here, and you select the playlists that you want to play with on your System One and export them across to that drive. Once you've done that, you eject that drive from the desktop software and then plug that media into the computer. There's a lot more about this in our Engine DJ Made Easy training. It's a powerful platform, so do check that out. There's a link underneath. Okay, so with my SD card, I'm going to now plug this into the unit. I've actually used an SD card because I think SD cards are better in this unit than USB drives. The reason is the USB drives stick out the back once you plug them in here, whereas the SD card stays reasonably flush with the unit. There's another way of putting your music in here a bit more permanently, which we're going to get onto in just a second. For now though, let's get it turned on. Plug your power in, press this power button here, and the unit will boot up. On the screen here, the first thing you're going to see is the Wi-Fi settings. And so if you haven't put your Wi-Fi network in, because this is the first time you use it, it's going to ask you to put your Wi-Fi details in there. Mine's already connected. The other thing it's going to do on the screen is ask you to connect to an Engine DJ profile. And that's quite useful because it means that you can have all the logins to your streaming services in one place. That's the main thing. But there's some other benefits to that as well. So consider getting one of those. You can use a QR code, which will show you on the screen. Do the usual stuff. It's a bit like signing into Netflix. So once you've done that, you can tell it that you don't want this screen to show in the future. If you don't want to confirm your Wi-Fi, you're always using the same Wi-Fi, you can just click Do Not Show again at startup there and click Next. So here is logging in. I'm going to use my QR code off camera now to get all set up. And we're good to go. If you want to log in to use this with another user or log out of someone else's gear, you hit that menu button as I did there, press Profile and click Log Out at the top next to the name of your currently logged in user. But we'll talk a lot more about this a little bit later on. And just for a very sneak first look, I'm going to press the source button on here now, and you can see my source untitled SD card is there. And here's the tracks on that SD. All pre-analyzed, which means I've got my times and my waveforms when I load them and so on, which we'll look at shortly. But why bother with all this stuff? Why bother with getting the laptop and analyzing your music on the laptop? Or indeed, if you just put a track in here that hasn't been analyzed on any old USB and load it to a deck, why does the deck then analyze it and get it all ready at all? Well, that's because these units have got a lot of functions on them that if you did it the old way by just throwing a load of files onto a drive and plugging it in, you wouldn't have access to it. It lets it organize playlists, it lets it get key information and stems information and information about the waveforms and keeping everything in sync. So it really is worth getting your head around if you're coming to this from more primitive equipment from generations gone by, the idea that music should be analyzed first. All right, all that done, I'm actually going to turn this off again. When you turn it off, it will check with you on the top that you definitely want to turn it off. And the reason I'm turning this off is that I want to show you another way that you can add your music to the unit. Let's get this unplugged and flip the unit over nice and gently, because underneath the unit, there is this internal HD panel. And underneath that panel is a slot for you to put in your own 2.5-inch SATA drive. And so let's have a look at that, and I'll show you how you can then get music onto that drive so you can have your collection permanently inside your System One, which again is pretty cool. So once you've got the lid off, you need to plug your SATA drive into this connector here. This is our drive, so that slots onto there. And then you should get with your drive some screws. Now this is a really cheap one, it doesn't have any. So one little tip is that when you're screwing it into here, use a couple of the screws that you use to take this off to secure this for now. And then when you obtain some, you can go back and add the ones in that are missing and finish the job. Okay, so with the drive all secured underneath the unit, on rebooting the unit and accessing the storage, it's going to tell you to scan a QR code to format it. And when you do that, you rather unhelpfully get a 404 screen. But it's not hard, so here's how you do it. The important thing is that you plug your computer in before you do any of that. If your computer is plugged in, the System One will see that, and then when you select the drive, it will get you to the computer to format it from there. It can all happen with the drive inside the System One from that screen. So over on the computer, select the drive and format it as exFAT. This is really important. That is the format it has to be. Give it a name. I'll just call mine internal. And then let your computer do its thing, get that drive formatted. When that's done, you eject it from the computer and then the unit will restart completely. There's the drive. I can click the little computer at the top right hand corner there and then go over to my computer and get the music onto there. Now you can just drag tunes onto there, but it's much better to use the Engine DJ utility on the computer, which will now see your internal drive, and it will also be available in the sync manager, so you can select it as a source and fill it up with analyzed music ready to use on the System One. Now, as well as working as a standalone unit, the System One can also work with Serato. If you've used Serato in the past, or you're curious about using a laptop with DJ software alongside your unit, it's free. The unit unlocks it. So head to serato.com, sign up for an account if you don't have one, download the software, get it on your computer, load it up. It looks something like this. Once you've done that, plug a USB cable into your laptop and into the back of the unit. I've used my permanently installed USB cable here, but it does come with quite a nice one that screws into the little hole there so that it doesn't get yanked out by mistake, which is a good touch. It's currently still seeing the music on the SD card that's plugged in around the back, but if I press the source button on the top of the unit, then I can choose Serato DJ Pro as a source. And now here is my Serato library. I can manipulate the library from here, but also I can do exactly the same thing over on the laptop by using the keyboard. Whatever I do, it's possible now to move around, navigate and load and play tracks from Serato DJ. And you can do that alongside the tracks that are already in the unit from Engine DJ. You don't have to reboot or anything like that. You can play them from wherever you want, which is something that's been added in Engine DJ 5, as are a lot of the features we're going to be looking at in this tutorial. A lot of the stuff you're seeing here is brand new at the time of me filming this for you. For the next few minutes, we're going to take a look at the features. I'm going to talk you around every knob, every button, every fader, every screen function. We're going to run through this fast, and then for the bulk of the tutorial, we'll look in more depth at the stuff that deserves a little bit more explanation. So this, as we've seen, is the touch screen. It's pinch, it's zoom, it's just like any phone or tablet. It's got the same features. At the top here, we have 3 buttons, which it's important to get your head around because you'll be using them a lot. So we've actually already seen the first one, which is the source button. That'll take you to all the sources of music on the System One. So we've got the currently selected SD card, but also I've got some streaming services here and other bits and pieces as well, which we will look in a bit more depth at some of. Now, the next button along is the browse button. This will take this to the screen, which we've seen very briefly here, which contains the currently selected source and the playlists and so on within that source. But tap it again and it takes you to this screen here, which is called the performance screen. This is the screen where the waveforms appear when we have got music loading on the decks, which we're getting to. And so you switch backwards and forwards from your library to actually manipulating the music that's currently playing using that button there. The menu button takes us to the control center. This is called the control center. We'll be getting on to talking about that later on. Now, the knobs at the top here, this is the scroll knob. So in my library view, I can scroll through the tracks. You don't have to do this here. You can use your finger here, but you can also scroll using this here. Choose what you want to scroll through and scroll. Pressing it down is the thing that you use to function. So for instance, there I've loaded the track because I was on the scroll button on the left rather than the right, and I pressed on a track. So if I wanted to do the same here, I wanted to load this track onto this deck. Because I'm on this scroll button, it will now load it to this deck, and you can see it's automatically taken me through to the performance screen there. Now these two knobs, when you're in this view, when you're in performance view, if you turn one of them, it'll go immediately back to the library because it's assuming that you want to load another track. However, on some other brands of DJ gear, that's not the case. On other brands of DJ gear, when you're in that screen, when you're in the screen where you can actually see the waveforms, it zooms in and out of the waveforms, which some people really like. And so they've made that something that you can do on here as well. If you tap in the menu and then settings, at the very bottom, there is encoder behavior. It's currently set to open library, which is what I just showed you. But if you set that to waveform zoom, then when you are in this view, you can see the waveforms are zooming in and out. And were I a little bit further on in the track, then you can see a little bit better that we got a much more granular view of it by turning it anti-clockwise, and then we can tighten it up by turning it in the other direction. That's purely personal preference, because you can always get back by tapping browse to here, and then it's just going to do what it did before. Now you saw me pressing this to load a track onto the deck. It's just loaded the track onto this deck here to replace the one that was already on there. If you want to take the track off the deck, then you press the shift button. This is the shift button, there's one there and one there, and you tap it again and it will deload the track. If you want to quickly put the track that's playing on one deck onto the other deck, double tap it. Not only does it load it, but it starts the deck playing at exactly the same point. That's called instant doubles. And finally, for these knobs, if you press and hold this, then it takes you into this screen here, which is the beat grid editor that lets you put a grid over the track so that when you hit the sync button, everything lines up nicely. I'll tell you more about how this all works later on. But remember, you can also get to that by pressing the menu button and pressing beat grid edit there. Now, earlier I was showing you how you press the encoder button, the rotary button, in order to move forward. And then when you get to a track, you press it and it loads, right? What if you want to go back again? Well, unsurprisingly, the button for that is called back. And this is how that one works. I'm just going to press browse to get out of that beat grid mode. So here I am looking through this particular playlist of tracks. If I press this, it will load. But if I press the back button here, it will take me back to the playlist that these tracks are in. I press it again, it'll take me to the whole collection. I press it again, it'll take me to this menu here. And now when I turn this, I'm moving through this menu here. This menu has got playlists, prepare, history and folder. Folder lets you browse through the folder structure on whatever you're looking at. So it might be folder structure on your SD card. History is what it says. It's what you have been playing. But prepare is something that I'm going to tell you about now. So firstly, we're going to go back into the playlist by pressing this button here. Now, if I want to add this track here to a special list that's temporary of tracks that I might want to play in the near future, maybe in the next, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, by holding down Shift and pressing the back button, it will add it to my prepare window, and it says added to prepare. I'll do that again, zoomed in. Let's grab another track. I'm holding down Shift off camera, press that, add to prepare list. So now if I go back to here, to these lists, and I go to this prepare list, you'll see that I've got these two tracks in it. We'll talk a bit more about this later, but these two tracks are now ready for me to play. If I load one of these to a deck, let's just for the sake of doing something different, load it to the other deck by pressing that, it will load to the deck. But if I go back there now, you see it's disappeared because I prepared it to play and I put it on a deck and now I've used it and it's gone. So this is a temporary list. It's a little bit like pulling the track up in a record box, right? You remember the old days, you had a record crate, and all your records in, and you'd flick through it and you pull halfway out all the ones you wanted to play. The prepare window is exactly that, but in this digital format. That's how you do it. Now, all this moving around with buttons to go backwards and buttons to go forwards and so on is all well and good, but it's a bit fiddly. What if you just want to save a playlist that you use a lot somewhere where you can get to it very quickly, that's what these are for. Holding down any of these, A, B or C, will save the currently selected playlist to that. So I'll hold that down there, and that's now got an A next to it. Now every time I press that button, wherever I am in the browsing structure, it will take me straight to that playlist. So you can have all your favorite playlists saved on those buttons, and it will grab them instantly like that. There we go, I'm back into that playlist. To get rid of a playlist, hold down Shift and press the button again, and it will empty that slot so you can put something else onto it. Over here on the other side, in the same place as the A, B and C playlist buttons, are these global buttons. Now, the bottom one is called quantize. That's just on or off, and that'll just make everything sound tighter by getting the timing perfect when you're mixing. Record and mixer EQ bring up windows here on the main section, and unsurprisingly again, they're about helping you to record your sets and to get the mixer and the EQ settings exactly how you want them. So let's have a look at how those work. We'll start off by pressing the mixer button. In fact, it's already pressed. So on the screen, I get fast access to some of the setup options. So for each of the channels, left and right, I can choose whether it's going to be working as a standalone unit with Engine DJ or as a controller with the computer. And again, they can be set differently. Then the microphone and auxiliary inputs let me route the microphone to where I want, whether it's going to be going to the booth and to the headphones as well as to the master output or not. Set anti-feedback, which is useful to have, and put effects. You can choose echo or reverb and the amount of echo or reverb, and the speed if you choose echo there as well. And this one's really cool. With output, I've got a full EQ over multi-band main and booth, so I can make the main and booth sound exactly how I want them. It can be so good, this, if you've got a PA system that's just not right and you're not going through any other mixer, there's no sound engineer, you can take over here and make it sound better. Knock some of those highs out, put a bit more bass in, tame the mids, whatever you want to do. Also, we get control here over the VU meter, whether the VU meter is showing us post or pre the EQs and faders, and also, and use this one with care, there's a main output boost. So if you just want to make everything a bit louder, as I say, use with care, that's where to find it. These are just some of the settings that you've got on the mixer. If you want to go to some of the other settings on the mixer, then there's an advanced button at the bottom there, which will take you into a panel we're going to look at more closely later on. So off camera now, I'll press record, which will take you to this very easy to use record screen with a big start button there. Pause the recording, start the recording again, stop the recording, and choose where to save the recording. Everything else about setting up recordings is done elsewhere, which I will show you in a little while. And also it's got a normalize or maximize, as they call it, which can adjust the recording upwards if you've recorded a bit quietly, but be aware it cannot take distortion out of it. So as ever, don't redline your mixes. Time to move on and have a look at the basic mixer and deck features. So we'll start off with the mixer. So the mixer is these controls here. It's also the controls down here and a couple of controls up here as well. So each channel, left and right, has an input level. That's what this control here is. Sometimes called gain, sometimes called trim. And this is the overall level coming into that channel from whatever you've got fed in there. Then we have the 3 EQ controls, low, mid and high. Let's get a track playing. So there's the input level. Here's our low, mid and highs. Turn them all down, we can't hear anything. Just the bass, just the mid, just the highs. Then you saw me use it there. This is the fader for this channel. So this will fade us up to the loudest that we've got it set here. And the same for the other channel, of course. The crossfader takes us between the channels. If we had a track playing over here, it's taking us between them that way. And then we've got buttons here that put the channel into our headphones. If I want to hear this one in my headphones, I press that. If I want to hear this one in my headphones, I press that. At the top here, we have a booth, which is the overall volume going to the DJ booth. And over here, we have a main, which is the overall volume going to the main output. Currently, the main output has nothing going to it, which is what this meter here is telling us. And currently, it does have something going to it. And this meter here is the volume that's been put in by these controls. Doesn't matter where this is set, this is telling us the overall volume up here. If I turn this up very loud, we're not hearing anything, but we can see if I were to turn it up, it would be in the red. You use these to get this sounding nice, and then you use these to blend it, which is what you see on the main there. Now, because the System One lets you play with stems, analysed files, and even lets you analyse them on board, which we'll look at, you can control that directly from the EQs. You can turn off the low, mid and high and instead turn on stems control. And that's what the drums, melody and vocals mean here. For the sake of controlling them here, we get three that we can play with. The drums, the melody, which includes the bass, and the vocals. It's different to when we control them on the pads, which we'll look at later. So to turn that on, you press stem there. This flashes to tell you that you're up and going. And I'm going to start this track playing here and we'll control the stems instead of the EQ.
Bass facts. Bass first.
So I've just turned off the melody by turning melody down.
Bass facts.
Let's turn that vocal off. Let's turn the drums off. Or just have the drums on their own as I've just set there. You'll see later on another way of controlling these that has advantages and disadvantages, but the advantage of this is one, it's right here where you're mixing anyway, and two, you can turn them down or up as much as you want, so you can fade things in and out, which you can't do when you're just turning the stems on and off. Let's move and have a look at the decks. Obviously there's two decks, we're only going to look at one of them. I'll look at the left hand deck here with you. So around the top we've got controls which directly affect the way that the deck performs. Stop time is a knob that goes from very short to very high. If I set the stop time quite low, when I press play and then stop the deck, it will stop pretty instantly. If I set it a bit higher, it takes a bit longer. And then if I set it all the way, it's like that classic turning the power off on an analog turntable kind of vibe. Good way to end the night. And so around the top here, these are the beat jump buttons, which will jump forward and back by the number of beats that you select with this encoder here. So by turning that encoder, you can change the number of beats that are shown here. It's currently set to 4, but if I turn this, you'll see this number here changes from 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 and then down again as well. So the idea here is that you can move forward and backwards through the track while maintaining the number of beats and bars so that it sounds kind of all right. So let's have a little go at that.
Bass first.
So you can see there that I was moving backwards and forwards through the track. I showed you the big waveform on the screen there that was showing us moving backwards and forwards through the track as I was pressing those buttons. But it didn't sound too bad because we were respecting the beat and bar structure of the track. So it's a nice way of quickly moving around. And as I say, if you use the beat jump length, then you can jump forwards and backwards by lots and lots of bars of music at one time, or just smaller amounts. So the other buttons at the top here, again, let us manipulate. That's what the deck controls are for, various things that are happening while we're actually playing. So Censor, which is the red button, will play the track momentarily backwards. And then the second you take your finger off it, it will carry on from where it would have been had you not pressed it. Classically used to stop curse words hitting the speakers, because you press Censor, it plays backwards for a second till the curse word has passed and then carries on where it would have been.
Bass facts.
Now slip is similar in that when you press this button, when you're finished doing something else, it will carry on from where it would have been had you not bothered pressing the button. However, it's up to you what you do. So a great way of using slip is if you want to maybe manipulate the platter, do a bit of scratching, because when you finish, the track continues to play from where it would have been. And actually you can see when I'm using both of these controls that the waveform splits, and one half of the waveform shows you where the track is going to be when you're finished, and the other half shows you what you're actually doing. So this time keep an eye on the waveform as I just do a bit of very bad scratching with slip mode turned on. Now, if I hold down the shift button and press this here, it will turn the motor off. So this isn't going round anymore, but it's still playing. I can't scratch in that mode. I can slow down and speed up. The whole platter does that. Turn that on again. And then if I want to just reverse the track, just play the track backwards, then holding down shift and pressing this button here will do that. And it's quite cool this, because the actual platter goes backwards as well. So just a couple of the esoteric functions with the controls up here before we move on. If I hold down the shift button, which you can just see in the bottom corner of my shot here, and turn this knob here, I can very quickly scrub through the track. Keep an eye on the full waveform here as I hold down shift and turn that. You'll see that I'm moving through the track much quicker than if I was just pressing those buttons backwards and forwards, especially if I set the beat jump value to very high. And so now I really am moving through the track quickly, and that works when you're playing the track as well. So it's a good way of quickly finding where you want to be in the track. Very useful in your headphones when you're preparing a track. Now that's currently set to 64. If I just press the button there, it'll set it back to 4, which is a good useful default. So that saves you having to move this left and right to set back to a beat jump value that's just 1 bar of music or 4 beats. So this button here, you might have noticed, has got censor, which is a function I showed you, but it's also got silent Q written on it. So what's silent Q? Well, silent Q will silence the track until you press a cue point. We haven't moved on to cue points yet, but they're a way of jumping to a part of the track and playing from there. This is useful if you are preparing DJ performances, if you're preparing something that you're gonna, something you've practiced, some kind of routine. And so it's often used by scratch DJs who will find it more useful than the censor function that this is currently set to. So it's got 2 functions, but we've only got one thing we can do with it. We already know that holding down shift will reverse. So how do we get to the silent cue function? Well, this is going to mean going into the menu. So I'm going to show you these properly later on, but a sneak preview here. If I press menu, profile, and then look down in the playback tab, then somewhere down close here, there we go, it's here. Censor button behavior. It's currently set to censor, but if I tap there, set it to silent cue, now that will silence the track. And then when I want to, I can press the cue point to start the track again. Let's do that. A couple of things on and around the decks to show you before we move on to the pads and the looping controls and the rest of the stems controls. So the first thing is the cue button. It does exactly the same as it does on all DJ gear. That means that if the deck is paused and you press cue, it will drop a temporary cue point right at that point. Bam, there. Now if I press play, it will play from that point. I press cue again, it'll go back to that point. Now, if I'm paused somewhere else, say there, and I press it again, it will jump to that point. In other words, I've lost the first one. That's why it's called a temporary cue. Pressing it when you're paused anywhere in a track will move this temporary cue point to that place, and now it's there. Now, if I press the cue button, once the deck's paused and I've jumped back to where the cue point was, for instance, then it'll temporarily play from that point. In effect, it's setting a new cue at that point and then playing from it for as long as my hand is held down on it. Now, if I'm playing and I want to continue playing, I tap the start button as you saw me do there while the cue is held, and then the deck starts spinning and it'll carry on from where I was. So another use of the cue button, which I spoke to them about years ago when they first introduced Engine DJ, and they're like, oh no, we don't want to do that anyway, they've done it, and I'm glad they did, is if you hold down the shift button and press cue, it'll jump to the start of the track. And if once you've jumped to the beginning of the track like that, you do it again, it'll load the previous track in the playlist, which looks like this. Previous track in playlist loaded. Now you saw me hold down the cue button to make the track play momentarily and then keep tapping it and it would keep going back and playing it from that point until I pressed start. There's another kind of way you can do that, which you might find more useful. So I was doing this. And then pressing the start button to get that track to play. However, if we go back to the beginning of the track there, you can hold down shift and press start to do the same thing. The difference there is that the track will carry on playing when your hand comes off the start button. With the cue, the second your hand comes off the start button, it won't carry on playing. So you've got two ways there of stutter playing from where a cue point is set. Now pressing keylock will turn the keylock on and off. As we know, that's now off. And that's on. If you hold down the shift button while you press this, it changes the speed of the deck from 33 to 45 or back again. So obviously one of those speeds is going to sound either too fast or too slow, but which one? You can set that in the software to your preferred default speed, and then the other one will react accordingly. Now here's something interesting. Look at the BPM on the currently playing deck, 94. If I move this pitch fader, nothing's happening to the speed. Notice that? It's not moving up or down. Why is that? This is something called soft takeover, and you're going to come across it when you are syncing your decks with tracks that are different BPMs. Because if you think about it, if you synced two decks, one of those tracks, assuming it wasn't the same speed initially as the first one, is going to have been speeded up or slowed down by the software, but it won't have moved the pitch fader. Of course it won't. It will just have done it kind of in its mind. So this is the way that you get around that. That's why this is locked, because if you tapped that the tiniest bit and it just took over at the real BPM for this deck, the speed of the deck would jump maybe quite a lot, and it would sound weird in the mix. So there's this thing called soft takeover, and soft takeover means that you can only start to control the tempo of this deck when you've moved the pitch fader to where the tempo would have been had the software moved it manually, which it can't do because they're not motorized or anything, had the software moved it when it synced it. So this little arrow here is your friend there, because this is telling you that you need to move the pitch fader in that direction in order to take over the tempo on this deck. So the tempo is currently 94. If I move this down to here, you see it finally took over it when it got to 94, and now I've got full control. All you need to know then is if you can't get your tempo control to work, it will always be a soft takeover issue, and the solution is to move it in the direction of that white arrow that's shown to you above and below the pitch control. Now, motorized decks like this are absolutely brilliant, but one thing they're not brilliant at is the controller way of manually beat mixing. When you're nudging tracks and you're just slowly trying to keep the tracks in time with your fingers, it's actually easier to do that on a controller than on a motorized platter. But these two buttons here are your friend for that, because the pitch bend buttons will slow down or speed up the track without you having to touch the platter at all, which makes manual beat mixing easier. Now, as I was holding down those buttons, it was slowing it down more and more, or speeding it up more and more as long as my finger was on the button. If you don't like that progressive way of pitch bending, you can change it in the settings. All these things I'm talking about in the settings we'll look at a little bit later on. So it's just a fixed amount when you hold that button down. Now, holding down the shift button and pressing one of these pitch buttons will change the range that the pitch control adjusts the track. It's now on a really big range. It's going all the way from 60 BPM all the way up to 180 BPM, and that's because we're currently set to a plus or minus 50 range. So holding down shift and pressing these will change that. It's now plus or minus 20, it's now plus or minus 10, and that number is going to change less, which means you get finer control at the expense of having that wide range, so you can blend together tracks that have got vastly different BPMs. And these two buttons here adjust the key of the track. You can see the musical key display where my finger is up there. If you want to sync with the other deck, you hold down the shift button, either shift button will do, and press this one here. Nothing on the other deck, so it didn't do anything. And if you hold down shift and press the right hand one, it will reset the key sync, and you can set the key sync to fuzzy key mixing, which trust me you need in the settings in the software, which I will show you a little bit later on. There's also quite a useful setting in there where you can set it so the key won't change unless you long press that button. again, it's one of those options. All right, we're going to move on now and look at the pads and the looping controls. Let's start off then by looking closely at one of the pad sets. So we have our buttons across the top here, which select the current pad mode. I'm currently in hot cue mode. These OLED displays here give us some information about the currently selected mode and what state the pads are in. And in hot cue mode, I get to set cues just like the temporary cue point, except these will stay with the track forever. So if I want to put a cue point down a little bit later on in the track from where we currently are, so there, then I'll press that button there. Now that's going to get remembered. And I can carry on until they're all full. To delete a cue, I hold down the shift button and I press the button I want to delete for the cue point that I want to get rid of, and that is now gone. But otherwise they will stay with the track. Now they will play momentarily if the track isn't playing. Bit like this one. But if the track is playing, they will play without you having to do the old pressing the start button while the cue is held, just as with the temporary one. So if the track were actually playing, then it jumps to it and carries on from where it was. Next up, we have two looping functions on roll here. The first looping function is kind of a combination of a beat synced loop with the slip control that we've already experienced. Let me show you. What that's doing is looping the track but letting it carry on playing underneath. That's why the slip control carries on, so you don't lose the beat. And again, you can see that in the screen. Now the colours here are important. These colours, these green colours, are clear fractions of a beat, half, an eighth, 1, 2, and so on. These are triplet values, which give you a more interesting sound. So if you want to do the classic beat roll where you're halving and halving and halving again, you avoid these ones and you only press the green ones like this. There's another loop mode there, which I'm going to come back to when I show you the dedicated loop controls in a minute. But the next one along is the sampler. So the sampler comes with built-in samples. So you've got your 808 sounds across the bottom there, 909 kick and snare actually, and then you got the classic sounds there, the fresh and siren and so on. If you want to stop a sample playing while it's going, so for instance the siren's quite long, isn't it? Hold down shift and tap that. Now you can load samples from the decks. Any sample you've got in your library, you can load to a slot by swiping, and instead of dropping on a deck, pressing one of the sample buttons down here to put it onto there. And that will be remembered as long as the drive that you've got plugged in stays in. So for instance, the internal drive that we put here, if you put some samples on there, it will remember that, it will always load. It's great for your personal idents and so on. Round the front, there's a sampler volume, and in the settings, you can choose where the samples are routed to. Again, we're going to get to these things in a little while. And then next up is stems. Now, stems is different depending upon whether the track is actually analysed for stems. Pressing this when the track is analysed for stems will give you vocal, melody, bass, and drums for that particular track. But if there's no stems analysis pre-done on that track, it will give you slicer mode, which chops a bar of the track up into slices, which you can then play here. Again, it's kind of like playing from that point. It's kind of like mini cue points with the slip function as well. Stems is the new one though. Stems is the one which is unique to this unit because you can actually analyze it on the unit as well. So here we've got drums, bass, melody, and vocals here. no vocals in that part of the track, so that's why the vocals wasn't doing anything, but you heard the melody, bass and drums switching in and out in real time there on this stems analyze track. Remember, you must analyze them either on the unit or ahead of time in the Engine DJ software on your laptop, which is the faster way of doing that. If you just want an instant acapella or an instant instrumental, then these buttons here will do it. You can see it's adjusting these. And what's useful about that is it will work in any mode. So this is doing that in the background. You don't need to switch to stems mode to do that. Oh, talking about buttons which will do something in any mode, we were in the loop roll mode here, but we also have these loop buttons here which can trigger a loop without you having to go anywhere near the loop modes on the pads. They're really intuitive. You can do automatic loops, you can do manual loops. I'm going to show you all of that now. So I tap that button there, you can see it's giving me a loop here. It's a 1 beat loop, but I can use these two buttons here to halve or double it, similar to what we saw on the loop roll. Now, if I find a loop that I like, I can actually save it, and that's the other loop function I was telling you about here. When we're in loop roll mode, if you press this one more time, you get this blank palette here. And because I've got a loop playing, if I tap that, it's going to remember that loop on that palette. It's going to remember the length of loop, and it's going to remember where I set that loop. So I can turn that loop off now here, and the track's playing away nicely. And that drops me straight back to the loop that I set, and I can fill them all up, and again they get remembered with the track. And once I've triggered a loop, these loop controls take over from that point, and you can use these as well. So this is also very, very useful for special parts in tracks where you don't want to forget the loops that you liked. Now, looping controls never used to have that auto loop where you could loop by a fraction or a multiple of a beat, because old-fashioned DJ gear never knew where the beats were really. They had manual looping on older gear, and you can still do it on this, and DJs sometimes like that flexibility to set a loop start and end point exactly where they want. It works by holding down shift and pressing these to trigger the loop in and the loop out. Let's do it. So I just went for the B of the word bass there by quickly pressing loop in and then loop out. You'll see we've got a very short part of the track loop there. There's nothing really to do with the beats, it's just when I press the buttons. So if I wanted to save that, I can press to get to the loop slots here, and just as with a normal loop, tap one of these and that will be saved for recall whenever I want it. Now, one other function here is this loop on off button can also be a reloop button, and what reloop means is it will jump to the beginning of the currently active loop. So let's just jump back to that one there. So that loop's just playing away nicely, but if I hold down shift and press this button, it will get me back to the beginning of that loop, and so I can use that creatively. Can be useful if you've played a loop and jumped all the way out of it, you're further on in the track and you just want to get back to the beginning of it quickly. Tapping that button will do that. And one more function here then on the slots where we're saving our loops. Just like with the hot cues, if you hold down the shift button and tap a slot, it will delete that loop. Did you notice that the loop I deleted, because it was active, was flashing the green and white color there as well? That shows you the loop you're currently in. Here's a trick you might have seen DJs doing where you make the loop out point shorter and shorter and shorter until it's kind of like a machine noise. You can do it with the in point, you can make them longer, but making the out shorter is the one most people use. It's on this unit, it's not marked on the unit, but it does work. It's a little bit buggy actually. I'll show it to you and I'll explain what I found and the way to get around that. So you get a loop, let's just I've set a short loop there. And then you hold down shift and you press either the loop in or the loop out button, depending on which part you want to alter. I'm going to set the loop out. You'll notice that when I press shift and loop out, this stops going round. You see that? That means I can now control the out point of that loop by using the platter. I did the same thing with the in point there by holding down shift and pressing that. What I found is that sometimes this doesn't work. So it's working now. I'm just using the top of the platter, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have to grab the whole thing. I'm not sure why, but that's the solution. So if you want to play with that one, as I say, it's not marked here, but you can do it. Okay, let's move over and start looking at the effects. The effects come in two flavors. The first is called the sweep effects, and the sweep effects are on one knob per channel, but you get to choose how much of it. It's totally under your control. It's not tied to anything other than whichever finger and thumb you use to turn that knob. Here's how it works. This is the sweep effect for each channel. So on this channel here, that's the filter, low pass filter all the way on. In the middle there, there's a click where nothing happens. And there's a high pass filter in the other direction. Generally, you get one version of the effect in one direction and one version in the other. This button here will turn it off and on. If that's off, nothing will happen. You might say, why not just turn it back to the middle? Why do you need a button to turn it off? It means that you can turn it all the way to the effect and quickly turn it off there. So it's a little bit tighter than turning it back to the middle to get to the same point where you're not hearing it anymore. If you want to change the effect, filter is kind of the main one that people use on here, but you can easily change it by holding down this effects select button. And holding that down will bring a panel up. So here I can choose another effect. So for instance, I could choose noise. You'll notice I forgot to turn it on there. That's what happens if you forget to turn it on. You'll notice also that I've got some parameters down at the bottom here. So for noise, I can choose how loud that noise effect is. Over on filter, I can choose something called resonance, which just gives it a nice, more musical note if you move it up here. And then you also have the extreme type. So in other words, when you get to the far reaches of the control, what will it sound like? This filter will sound very different to the one we were just listening to. It's just more extreme and it's completely off there. So that's going to give you a version of that that just cuts through a little bit more. This is the wash effect. Like a couple of combinations of loop and echo out there. Quite a heavy reverb, quite a large room reverb on the left, and a shorter reverb on the right there. And that's a dub echo, which you might think sounds a little bit like the wash effect that we used, but the wash effect took the track completely out of the mix entirely, whereas dub echo leaves the track playing. So you've got two versions of echo effects there that, again, you choose how much they cut in or out of the mix by how quickly you turn this knob, and having it in the middle will do nothing. So the other main type of effect is the BPM effects. These cycle with the BPM that you've selected rather than you using the knob, as with the sweep effects, to decide what the effect's doing and when. These are tied to the BPM of the track. Here's how they work. Well, to start with, how do you turn them on and off? You use these paddles here. That'll lock the effect on, that'll put it on momentarily. Whichever effect you choose, and here they are, it's the same on both channels. If I choose echo, it's going to use the same echo across both channels. So there's actually 6 of them: echo, reverb, recycle, pitch down, rise, and echo out. I'll show you how you can change these in a second, but for now, we'll just talk about the ones we've got here. They are post fader, which means that if the fader is put down while the effect is triggered and it happens to have a tail, which is always the case with echoes and so on, then you'll continue to hear that even though you've turned the track off in the background, which is nice. And so let's just have a play with the very first one, the echo effect. To choose the effect you want, you just press its button there, but it's not on because you haven't turned it on using these at this stage. I turned the track off so you could hear the echo, and you heard it echoing on even after I turned the track off. Now, the length of time that takes to echo out is one of the parameters. This is the parameter knob. So I'm going to turn this, and you'll see here, this is called feedback. Now, if I put that all the way up, you'll hear that it's a very different echo. Took a lot longer to disappear. It was still echoing quite quickly though, and that's because this beat value is set quite low. It's set to 3/4 of a beat. If I use the joystick here, I can set this beat value to something much higher. So to say 4 beats, well, let's go to 2 beats. So now the echo is going to sound very different again. It's going to take a long time to fade out, and also the actual number of echoes are going to be fewer because they're taking longer to happen. Now, there's another parameter here, frequency, and the way you reach that parameter is by pressing down the parameter button. The color changes here, and now I'm altering the cutoff frequency of that effect. Each effect will have a different set of controls here that you can use parameter with. So the reverb effect here has got the room size, so you can have a big reverb, it sounds like you're in a large room, or a smaller reverb. Let's set a nice high reverb there and have a listen to that one. So recycle, different kind of echo there. Pitch down is quite an interesting one. Let's see what that one sounds like. Kind of a cross between reverb and the opposite of pitch down for rise. And the final one of the default effects is the echo out. To explain what the echo out does, I will talk to you about why we use this effect. And you normally use it to switch from one track to another. It just kind of echoes the current track out, so it goes to silence, and then you can start a new track playing. Very, very common effect. And you don't actually need a special button to do that. You can just use the normal echo, but it means you've got to do two things. You've got to set the echo going, and then you've got to turn the track off and then go and do something else. Echo out makes that more simple. So if we were to do it with the normal echo, then you'd have to do this. Turn the echo on, turn the track off in order to get that clean so you can start something else playing. Echo out just does both for you in one go like this. I'll set that to the same length of echo, to 1 beat, so you can hear the difference. No need for me to pull this fader down to get that to happen. There's one more control here, and it's effectively the volume control for the effects. It's this one here. If you have all this all the way down, it doesn't matter what you do here, you won't hear it. I had it in the middle, which is about normal. So you'll hear a mixture of the normal track and the effect. Turn it all the way that way. You'll only get the effect when you trigger an effect here. Now, what if you want to use a different effect? There's loads built into this unit. Well, you just hold down on the effect that you want to add the new one to, or rather replace the new one. So if I didn't want, say, the pitch down, that was no use to me. Hold that down, and then this screen here comes up with all the other effects, and you can see we've got 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 26 different effects here that we can choose from. Obviously, some of them are already assigned to buttons. You can just touch the effect that you want using your finger, or you can use these knobs here to move between them, and then you can press down on the knob to select the new effect, or just tap it yourself with your finger like that, and it will go to there. So obviously the labeling doesn't change. You need to remember where they are, but now this effect here is the effect I just chose, the riser, and not the pitch down. Now, there are 4 effects called fader effects, and the faders are what trigger them rather than buttons or knobs. To turn on the fader effect, you give it a tap, and now instead of the fader turning that track down, it's echoing it out, and it works on the crossfader as well. Choose between the effects or to alter their parameters, you hold this down, and then another screen comes up here. We've got fader echo, stutter verb, echo down, and reverb down. Let's have a listen to those. Now you can choose here how long the effect goes on for, or the feedback, or the depth. Depending upon the effect you've chosen, you get different options down here, a bit like the parameters. You can choose the number of beats the effect, especially for the echoes, that's useful, takes. And also you can disarm after trigger. And what this means is that once you've used it once, it turns it off. So if I go disarm after trigger there, this is what happens. You see that the button went off, stopped being triggered after the first time I'd done it, and it went back to being a volume control. And finally, for the effects, the touch effects. They let you use the touch screen to control a whole number of effects. So the way they work is by pressing this touch effects button here, which brings up this touch screen here, and you choose the effect by tapping there and picking the effect you want. So for instance, a low frequency oscillator filter there. Depending upon the effect you've chosen, you're going to get different options, and they're going to sound different if you move up and down or left and right. Some of them do also have parameters at the bottom here. They also have a latch, and that means that as opposed to what happened then when I took my finger off, the effect stopped. If you turn latch on, your finger's last position will remain locked. And you can move away from that screen and go do something else. That effect will remain locked. Now I've spotted a bug here because this is meant to flash to remind you that that's latched on when you do that, and it's not flashing in this version of the software that I'm running here. I'm sure they'll fix that at some point. Now those effects are all, of course, in hardware. If you're using Serato software, you can trigger your Serato effects from there as well, but that's beyond the scope of today's tutorial. We're looking at the engine built-in implementation in this video. So a lot more to come on that screen. Before we move on to that though, I want to just cover off the stuff on the front and rear of the unit, because there's an awful lot of input and output and other controls that we haven't looked at yet. So I'm going to flip it around now. Let's first look at everything along the front of it. So starting right in here on the left hand side, we've got our two inputs for our headphones, 8¼ inch. Then we have the headphone volume, split Q, which decides whether you hear the cued signal in both headphones or whether you hear it in one with the master output in the other one. And this mix gives you a mix between the main output and the cued output. So all the stuff you'd expect for headphones is present and correct there. So the auxiliary input here, we've got a level for it, and you can choose whether it's Bluetooth, and I'm going to talk you through the settings for this on the screen in a bit, or the auxiliary input, which I'll show you on the back in a second. I mentioned it earlier, here's the sampler level. So moving along here, the crossfader contour decides whether the crossfader is set sharp or smooth. Scratch DJs will of course want the crossfader nice and sharp. And also there's the reverse or hamster button there. So left means right and right means left. If you don't know what that means, you don't need to at this stage, trust me. This is nice. This is a tightener. So you don't have to take the top off to decide whether you want the crossfader to be pretty tight or very, very loose. You can just do that, which is an improvement on previous units where you had to remove the panel to do something similar. So here we have the channel contour. This is a similar thing for the channel faders. So you can have the up faders here so that down is on and up is off by reversing them using these buttons here. And you've also got a contour knob which decides how quickly or slowly the music goes from not playing at all to fully playing as you move these channel faders up and down. So here is the microphone effects. So you can choose a microphone effect between reverb and echo. I'll show you how to do that in a bit. You turn it off and on here, and depth is the amount of microphone effect you get. And these are the two microphone channels. So the one on the left has this button here which has got on, off, and a word that says duck, D-U-C-K. So duck is talk over. It basically means when you're talking into the microphone, the music will automatically go down. This and the other channel have both got a level and a low and high EQ. So some pretty good microphone stuff there. Round the back then, power on, off and cooling fan. Up here we've got all our USBs, there's a lot of them. So the SD card plugged in here is where I've been getting my music from. Here are two other USBs for adding extra music, either using a USB-C or a USB-A. You can add drives here as well. You can also add a sound switch lighting control unit here. Right, up here is all the outputs then. So we've got the main output. These are balanced XLRs. There's a useful stereo to mono switch there. A lot of club systems are in mono, so you can switch the whole thing to mono there to make everything sound more uniform. Standard unbalanced RCA outputs there and balanced booth outputs there. Here is that auxiliary input that you can switch on the front from Bluetooth to auxiliary. And here's the actual inputs for the microphones. Now they look like XLRs, but because they are what are called combi jacks, you can also plug standard 1/4 inch microphone jacks into there as well. So we've looked at most of the physical features of the unit now. What we haven't done, other than for what we needed to do in order to do that, is look a little bit more at the screen. Because clearly this is a computer, and clearly that means it's got a whole lot of control that is based around this screen. And indeed it's a touch screen. So a few of the things you can do with this touch screen include zooming all the way into the waveforms. So it will zoom into them both together, as you can see here. Also, you can put your finger onto the overview waveform. This is the whole track from beginning, where my finger is now, all the way to the end. And you can scroll upwards and down to get from the beginning to the end of a track. When it's paused, when it's playing, you can do it as well if you change a setting, which I'll show you a bit later on. Your default setting will not let you do that when it's actually playing. You need to be paused to do that. So this screen is currently in performance view, which is the view you'll see when you're playing tracks. So obviously at the moment there's nothing playing, but if I hit play, you'll see that the decks are showing us where we're at on the decks. Now what we've got here are these lines which show us the beats and bars of the track. I'll show you how to adjust the beat grids in a minute. Let's look at a few of the other features then going on around here. So you can see at the top we've got the artwork. I don't have artwork on my tracks, so that's just showing a blank. You've also got the name of the track, which scrolls to let you see everything that's said. Some of this stuff we've actually seen before. So we've seen the BPM. This is the BPM of each of these tracks. Lead is telling you which deck is in charge. And so if you sync the other deck, it will change its BPM to match the current lead deck. So we've looked at this. This is the pitch range, plus and minus 8%. This is where the pitch is currently set to, 0.00%, which means that the pitch control is bang in the middle. If I move the pitch control, you'll see that this value here changes. And so we've also got here the value that we've already looked at for beat and also for loop. So this is beat jump. This is going to jump forwards and back plus 4 beats or minus 4 beats when you press the beat jump controls. And the loop is currently set to 4. So if I were to engage a loop, then that's going to be a 4-beat loop. And if I make the loop double the size, then that's moved to 8. Exactly the same as if I change the beat jump length, then that is also going to change the value there. Again, we've looked at those before, but just to go over that one again. This one we haven't seen. So this is the elapsed time or the time left. It's currently set to time left, 1.21 or 1 minute and 21 seconds. If I tap on that, you'll see that it's now telling me we've used 2 minutes 34 seconds of the track, and this area here is now the dimmed out area that says this is the bit that's left and this is the bit that's used. If I tap on that again, you'll see that it switches the other way around. And you'll also notice that it doesn't matter which one I tap on, they both change at once. You can't have one set to elapsed and one set to time left. They have to both be altered at the same time. Now we can tap on the key. This is the musical key here. So we've already looked at the physical key controls, but we can tap on the key here. So if I tap on that key there, then I can move the key up or down here like this for this track. I can also use the key sync feature here, and I can also turn key off entirely so it's not engaged for this track. So this is a touchscreen way of doing some of the physical stuff that we looked on down here at the key adjust controls a little bit earlier on. When you add cues and loops to a track, the screen will also show you where they are. So for instance, if I had a hot cue there on this track, it says Q1. If I label the cue, it will tell me the name of the cue there as well, which corresponds with the name of the cue that you see in the screen display here down on this OLED screen. And if I add a loop, that loop will also show on there for the length that's set. Currently, it's set, as we just saw, to 4 beats, and the loop control is now lit up there to show me that that is an engaged loop. So that's lit up when the one down there is also lit up and flashing. That is the default view for performance mode, but you don't have to stick to the default view. There's actually 3 views that you can have, and you can customize them. I'll show a little bit later on how you do that. For now though, let me show you how you switch between those views. You hold down either Shift button and you press the menu button. So if I hold down Shift and press menu now, we go to a slightly different view here. You can see we now have a mix of the library and the performance mode. And I'll do it again. So you can see that we've now got the library in the performance mode, but the performance mode has gone to the kind of more traditional, at least for some DJs, horizontal waveforms. And again, Shift and menu will take us back to the first one. Just want to go back to one of the views that we saw there, which is the one where we had the performance mode and the library together. This is quite a useful place, especially if you're playing a set out of one playlist and you don't want to keep switching between the performance mode when you can see the waveforms and the library mode where you can see the library. You just want to be able to see that one playlist and quickly manipulate, preview and load tracks from that. It's a very fast way of working. So this is how it works. We're going to go back to it first. I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to press menu, and this is the one that's come up now. It's only showing me 5 tracks in the current playlist down here. I can move between them just by doing this. I can also grab the bar here to move quicker between the tracks in the current playlist. You can show more by making the font smaller. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. For now though, let's look at the things you can do. Now, to be clear, this top area here is exactly what we are used to seeing in that full performance view mode. In other words, we've got the waveforms here that we can do this with, we can do this stuff here. It's all the same as it is, just squashed up a little bit more in order to allow us to see this at the bottom. So what can we do with this at the bottom? Well, one of the cool features here is that we can tap on the artwork, and there's no artwork on my tracks because again, I don't bother with it, but we can tap on the artwork, we'd see a tiny little record cover here if we have artwork for the tracks. And this is now lit up with a kind of headphone symbol. And the reason for that is it's playing in my headphones. So I can preview tracks from here. Now I can tap on the track itself and you'll see that it's coloring it in, and I'm previewing all the way through the track. So in my headphones, while I've got tracks playing on both other decks, I can be previewing a third track very, very simply like this, deciding if I want to load that track. If I do want to load that track, I swipe it left to load it on the left-hand deck. I swipe it right to load it on the right-hand deck, the same as we would anywhere else. If you want to see the full information about any track as in the normal library view, then you just tap the track like this, hold it, and this will come up with everything about this track there, where you can add the stars to it, which is a lovely new feature in Engine DJ 5 and onwards. In all modes, right across the very top, there is what they call the toolbar. This little section here, at the moment there's not an awful lot in there. There's that little Q there. That's telling us if we've got the quantize mode on or off. Remember quantize, it helps you keep everything nicely on the beat. If I turn quantize on there, the light lights up there, but also this becomes bolder there. We also have the time here. If we're recording, then our record features are shown to us up there. We'll show you recording in a little while. But maybe the main point of this toolbar is grabbing it and going down like that, because that will then bring up this panel here. We looked very briefly at some of this stuff earlier on, and towards the end of this tutorial we're going to come back to it because it goes even deeper than this. We can dive into settings up here that take us to control for pretty much everything about the unit that you can imagine. For now though, we're going to get back out of that because we need to look at the library view. So to get to the library view, press the browse button at the top and we're into this view here that we've seen before. If you tap collection, it will show you everything that's in the current collection, and just tap back onto the playlist to hide that once you've selected what you want. A few more features. The little A and A there goes from big to the small view. So if you have got good eyes, you might want to set it like that. It makes it easier to see more on the screen at the same time. The scroll bar here, just like we saw earlier, will let you move up and down through the tracks, just like it lets you move up and down through a particular loaded track when you're in the performance view. This little button here lets you play the whole current playlist on one deck. So if I click on there, it'll say load playlist to deck A or B, and then it will just play through that playlist. It can be very useful for background music when you're not actually DJing. I've already shown you that going like this will give you the chance to prepare the track, but if I also look a bit further, you'll see we have stem there. That will analyze the track and add it to the stems playlist that you can see here in the collection there. These two tracks have already been analyzed for stems in that way, and then I can load those and perform with them with the vocals separated from the bass, the drums and the melody, and so on. There's a couple of other ways of loading tracks onto the decks that I haven't shown you yet. Let's have a look at those. The first one is just to double tap on a track, And that'll take you back to that screen there where we can load it onto deck 1 or deck 2, but we can also load onto any of the sample slots by tapping the sample slot there. Yes, you can load whole songs onto sample slots. And yet another way to do that is to go as if you're going to load it onto deck 2, but don't go all the way when you're swiping. So I'll move that track like this, you'll see that it says deck 2, which is what's going to happen, but it also says load. If I just stop at that point and tap on load, I'm at this screen as well. Loads of ways of doing the same thing. Let's go back and talk about that stems function a little bit more, because at the time of recording this, this is the only controller, the only standalone unit out there that can actually analyze for stems on the unit itself. Now, it's not particularly quick. It takes about 2/3 of the time that it would take just to play the track in order to analyze it for stems. So really, you should be doing this ahead of time on your software, on your laptop, but you could leave it running on a playlist overnight. You could also just at a push do it when you're performing if there's a track you really want the stems for. But there is a bit of setting up. So let's talk through how to do that now. So to start with then, on the unit itself, the stem support needs to be downloaded. You need to be on the internet the first time you engage it. Let me show you what happens then if you try and analyze a track for stems without doing that. Remember, we slide our hand like this to get to the stems word here, and we tap on stems, and it's going to say download engine stems at this point. And so I'm going to click yes, and it's going to go to this panel here, which is something we haven't looked at yet, which we are going to come to. But look at this line in the middle, downloading stem support. This is the thing that we're interested in, because when this is finished, it's going to say stem support is there. I go back to my library. Now I can grab a track, and this time when I hit the stems button, it will go to the stems added display there, and in the playlist for stems I can actually see it analyzing that track here. And as I say, it takes a little bit of time, but in the end that's going to be ready for me to load onto a deck and DJ with all the stems present. One of the things that laptop DJs miss when they come to standalone units is the ease of searching for tracks, because one thing that laptop DJing has is a very big keyboard and a very large screen to help you search for tracks. Luckily, the search functions on units such as this are pretty good. So let's have a look at how they work. I'm going to go back into my playlist view here of that playlist we've been using, and I'm going to click the little search icon at the top here. So that immediately launches the search bar, and it also launches a keyboard, which is what we use to type in the search that we want. Before we do that though, let me show you this little setting up here. So we can choose to search only in the current playlist, or we could choose to search in our whole collection. And so this is very, very useful. Of course, if you're playing out of one playlist, then you don't need to search your whole collection. You don't want your tracks to be muddled up with stuff from all over the place. So I'll leave it set to this current playlist at the moment. And then you can start typing in by tapping there what you want. So let's start typing in to find all the digital DJ tips tracks there. So they're all now listed. DDJT tracks are all here. Now you can do other things here to make this search a little bit more useful to you. And one of those is down here, selecting what it's actually searching. So it's set by default to title and artist, which is probably what you're going to want most of the time. But as you can see, you can search by all kinds of other things as well. You might have your own system in the comments. You might only want to search by certain genres or years. And there's also ways of fine-tuning some of this, which we're going to come to in a minute. Once you have your search results, you can then do a couple of other things with that results page. So for instance, I could click into this little filter here and filter by whatever I choose within those search results. So say I want to filter by BPM, I can say, give me tracks that are 94 BPM within that result. So there's only one track there that's 94, 117. These are only going to show you the numbers that actually exist. 122 and 125. Notice that 122 and 125 are also showing nearby. So in other words, I'm on 122 now, it's showing me the 125 tracks as well. That's something that you can set. You can set the tolerance for these things, the musical key and also the BPM, so that it will show you stuff that isn't in the same key but that's compatible, or that isn't in the same BPM but that's close enough for you to be able to manually beat mix them together or sync them together and they won't sound bad. So I'll show you how you can set those in your profile a little bit later on, so those results work for you. Having them within a few BPM is very normal with these kinds of filters. You can also change the order of the tracks in your results here. So I've just clicked that little button at the top to give me all these things I can change the order by. Let's change it to BPM, and then using this little button to the right of the one I pressed, I can choose whether I want ascending or descending BPMs within that playlist, but there's lots of other things there that you can choose to order them by as well. Now there's also a feature called match. This is something that's again on most DJ systems, and this lets you set a set of criteria which it will then filter the list by every single time for you when you're DJing. Let me explain to you a little bit more closely how that works. It's these two little, almost like these two little crossfader symbols here. You tap on there, and the first one is follow lead deck. Now you're going to want to leave this switched on because there's only 2 decks on this unit, and what this means is that it will match to the currently playing track based upon what you then select beneath. So you could say, okay, give me a match that's within a certain number of beats, that's within a certain set of key criteria, that is in a close or exact musical genre, and optionally you can say don't ever suggest tracks I've already played. Once you set all those things, it will, when you tap those 2 little circles, match to the currently played deck any tracks that suit your criteria. Again, it's just a really good way of quickly getting to something that might make sense to play next. So it's possible to make playlists on the unit. You can't then take the playlists that you make and put them back into your master engine library, which is a bit of a limitation. Nonetheless, it's worth knowing how to do this for making playlists that stick with this particular drive. I've clicked on that little edit icon there, which takes me into the playlist mode. You can see them in that mode because each individual track in the currently selected playlist, or wherever you happen to be, has a little circle by it, which I'll show you what it does in a minute. And you also get this create playlist option here. So I'm going to create a playlist. I'll call it my demo playlist. Now, once I've created a playlist and I'm still in the edit mode, I can pull to the left to rename it, or I can pull to the right to remove it. I don't want to do either of those things. I want to select some of the tracks and put them into my playlist. So let's select that one there. Let's select that one there, that one there, that one there. Once I've selected the tracks I want to add to my new playlist, I'm going to hold down on any one of them and keep my finger on there and drag it up into the playlist like that. They've now been added into that playlist. So I'm going to go into that playlist. I'm going to go out of the edit mode for a second and go straight into that playlist. You can see there's my 4 tracks. Now I'm going to go back into the edit mode while I'm in it, because now I can rearrange within this. So if I want to put that track below, and I want to put this track at the very beginning, so this way I can create a set where I've got a rough kind of play order, and I've done that all on the unit itself, which can be useful. So there's my rough play order. Again, if I want to get out of that, I can by tapping that icon there. So this will only work if you've got play order selected in the sort at the top. So if you can't get what I just showed you to work, do that. You can also use this to drag tracks to the stems analysis that I showed you earlier. And you can also drag whole playlists onto stems analysis. It's another reason why it's a good way to organize things on any particular drive. Now, I also showed you earlier, but just as a reminder, if you wanted to save a playlist onto a playlist button, then you can do that. Just get yourself into a playlist, hold the button you want to save onto it, and I can recall it easily. Now, another thing you can do here locally, but this time it will go back to your main engine library when you take the SD card or the USB and plug it into the computer and get the sync manager up in that software, is adjust the beat grids. The beat grids, again, are the grids over the tracks that show the software where the beats are. I mean, the sync button works, the looping works, the effects that are tied to the BPM work, and so on. It's good to be able to do it on the unit itself, because that's when you might hear that there are errors in the tracks. And also you might have tracks you didn't have time to analyze ahead of time. Let me show you how you do that. So firstly, you need to have a track on your decks. I think I've got a track. Yes, I've got a track already loaded on the right hand deck. So in order to edit the beat grid on a track that's loaded on the deck, you hold down its button at the top, its scroll button on that knob there, and then you go into this beat grid editing mode. So in the beat grid editing mode, you can just about see that there are lines. There are little red lines on the beats here. I mean, they're almost impossible to see even with a naked eye, never mind on a camera, but they are your grids. And so you can move the downbeat left or right. You can see this is showing the first beat of the bar as it moves through the track like this, and it's just moved off the screen. You can navigate the track like this to get to the place where you're looking at your beat grids. and these beat grids look fine all the way through. You can see the bar number 10 there, and there's a line there, bar number 11 there, and there's a line there, and so on all the way through the track. This is looking fine. But I can move the downbeat or the first beat of the bar as I just showed you. What I'm doing now is navigating through the whole track. You can do this as well. If you want to get an overview, you can see the grid lines at least a little bit more obviously there. You can see each individual bar marked. Now, if you want to shift the whole grid left or right, there's two ways of doing that. You can do it on the jog wheel. The whole grid is now moving, as you can see on the screen, but also you can do it by pressing these little shift right and shift left buttons here to get the grid lined up. Again, you can always do this to have a look. You can decrease or increase the BPM if it's just got it completely wrong. You can halve or double the BPM by doing this, and you can see the different BPM showing there. And you can also tap the tempo in if it really is not getting the BPM right by using this tap tempo button. Probably the most useful thing if you've got difficult songs is insert anchor. Insert anchor will put a definite grid down, a definite line down. So if you definitely know that a beat is right, then you can put that anchor sign in, and then you can then move up forward in the track and then get that bit right, put another anchor down, forward, get another anchor down, and so on. Again, fiddly compared to doing it on Engine DJ, but at the same time really useful if you've got to, in a pinch, get a track beat gridded that is giving you issues in the mix. All that's left for us to do is look through the menus. So tapping menu will get us onto this screen that we have looked at. Very briefly, we've got continue, which decides if the next track plays automatically in a playlist. Beat grid edit we just looked at. Bluetooth device volume, that gets the volume of any device that you've linked using Bluetooth. So I'll press the button at the bottom there to get to that Bluetooth menu. Then we've got our Ableton link, which links to Ableton software on a laptop, and day mode gives us that nice bright day mode there. And down at the bottom we can select our sources, we can configure our Wi-Fi, and which we're not touching on at all in this tutorial, we can configure lighting. Engine has a lighting mode which lets you control sound switch. It's a lighting protocol. And also, quite nicely, if you happen to own any Philips Hue or Nanoleaf lights that work on your home Wi-Fi system, this will control them as well, which can be a lot of fun in your living room. Trust me, I've done it. So let's get back out of that then and go into our menu selection at the top here. This was the control center I just showed you, but we have other menu options here. So the first one is layout. Now we've looked at this already because I showed you the different ways you can have your screen laid out. Here's where you configure them. So you have those three views, view 1, view 2 and view 3, and for each view you can choose whether the wave forms are horizontal or vertical, whether the library is showing, whether the album art shows, and whether the main effects show on the screen as well. And once you've configured those views, you can switch between them as we were looking at earlier. And you can also just click reset if you want to get back to the way that view was set at factory install if you don't like the way you've messed around with them. Now, profile is where the big stuff happens, and also settings. They've both got loads of menus, which we're going to spend some time going through now. The difference with these two things is that profile is yours. It saves onto the drive you're on, and then that can go with you to different Engine DJ units. Settings are for this individual unit. So let's go for profile first. So profile has a digital DJ tips icon at the top, and that's because it's saved to your profile that we showed you how to log into right at the very start of this video. Now here is the whole list of things that are on this particular screen, and then we have all the other screens here like this. Let's go through them all then. So to start with, at the very top of playback, motorized platter start normal and instant is a way of making the motorized platters behave more like vinyl, or more useful for someone who just wants, when they hit the start button, for everything to be in time. This is, along with a lot of these things, really down to your personal preference. Motor torque is how powerful the motor is. Track speed we looked at earlier. It's whether the motor rotates at 33 or 45 by default. Turntable mode decides that when you reach the end of a track, whether the turntable carries on going round even though there's nothing to play, or whether it just stops automatically. Track start position, when you load a track, does it start from the very beginning or from the first cue point? Maintain play state on load, does it reset everything when you load a track, or does it keep it how you had it set? Sensor behavior button, does the sensor button work primarily as a sensor button or as a silent cue button? We looked at that earlier. It depends on which one you use the most as to how you have that set. Acapella Instrumental effects. Do you have the Acapella Instrumental buttons set so that when you press it, it goes straight to an acapella or straight to an instrumental, or does it use an effect as its primary purpose? Holding down Shift will always give you the opposite one. In other words, this is down to you. Also down to you when you hit the sync button, does it snap to the nearest beat, the nearest bar, or just get the tempo of the tracks the same and let you do that bit. The sync button can be turned off by holding down shift and tapping it, or just by tapping it again. That's where you set that. We looked at the pitch control type earlier on, and also the pitch bend behavior, whether it gets faster the longer you have your hand on the pitch bend button, or whether it just slows it down or speeds it up by a set amount. And we looked at the key sync mode, fuzzy or strict, earlier on as well. Trust me, just set it to fuzzy. So the next tab along is cues and loops. We can decide whether the cue and loop snaps to the nearest beat, or a fraction of, or a multiple of there. Paused hot cue behavior decides whether when you've got a track paused, the hot cue will only play for as long as your finger's on it, or will start playing from that. Pioneer DJ, Alpha Theta, CDJ style, you get to choose. You can set the default size for loops and beat jumps here if you don't want it to be 4. Smart loops will, even though you've got manual looping controls, it will make the manual looping controls go to the nearest beat. Move cue to loop in is a way of deciding when you hit a loop button, whether the cue point also moves to that loop button. And here's more loop behavior. You can have it so that the save loop goes back to the save loop when you hit the button, or it just disables and re-enables the save loop when you press the save loop button. And the paused save loop behavior decides whether when you hit a save loop, when you're paused, whether it enables that loop or whether it actually triggers and starts that loop playing. Leave all these as they are until you decide that you don't like it, or there's something you want to do that one of these might make easier for you. So as we move through your personal preferences, the next one is display. When you've played tracks, they are a different color to show you've played them. This will reset that. If for some reason you haven't got any metadata on your files, maybe you've got a drive full of tracks that are only named in the file name, you can select the file name there. I'd leave that as it is unless you know you want to change that. The time format will change depending upon where the pitch control or the tempo control is set, how much time is left or has been elapsed, because obviously if you've speeded the track up, then really there's less time before you reach the end. But it's up to you how you have that one set again. Track end warning will flash 30 seconds in this instance before the end of the track to show you, but you can set that to less or more. And waveform style, there are 2 types of colors. You can have 3-color or full RGB, and that's where you can set that. Now safety is stuff which will stop you looking like a fool. You can lock the playing deck so that you can't accidentally load a new track onto it. You can lock the waveform so that when the track's playing you can't accidentally jog the track forward or back by touching that big overview waveform. And you can also lock the pads if you really never use the pads but you're scared that you're going to rest your hand on them by mistake or something and do something that you don't understand. Now key adjust, a long press or just tapping the button to adjust the musical key. Again, it just means that you need to be more intentional to make these things happen if you're a little bit clumsy. Now, when it comes to the library controls, we can list or not list the stems in the library. We can choose the type of key notation we want. So if you're a musician, you might want it to display in normal key notation rather than the DJ friendly notations, open key and Camelot. That is chosen there. The key filter will match only compatible tracks or simply tracks which are the same key. And then this is where we change what I was talking to you about earlier, the BPM range and the filter tolerance. So if you don't like to mix too far away from the current BPM, that's where you set that. And the collection browse behavior decides that when you tap on a playlist, whether it opens it straight away or whether you need to tap it a second time to open it. In other words, select or open. The final set there we don't need to worry about, which are the deck colors, because the decks here don't have colors. But if you're DJing on a unit where it does, you can select the deck color here. Or I guess if you've got another unit that's got colored decks, colored jog wheels, so you can select it here. And then when you load your profile on that unit, you'll see that displaying on your choice. Let's move on to the settings now that are unit specific. And so we've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on or off. Stem support we've looked at. You can set the time and date there. You can set whether you want a 24-hour clock or AM, PM. Set your time zone, whether it's automatic or manual. The playhead position is quite a good one. This decides where on the waveform your playhead is. It's currently right up here, which means you get this whole chunk of track flowing up before it hits the playhead. If you'd rather have it a little bit closer to the middle, then that's where you change that. If I put it all the way the other way, the playhead's now moved down here. Some people like to be mean and hide the title and artist from the screen so no one knows the title and artist of the track they're playing. This turns the track preview function on and off, and this alters the volume of the track preview function that we looked at earlier. This is how long it takes before the screensaver kicks in, and this is your screen brightness. Here we have the encoder behavior, whether the encoder opens the library when you turn it or zooms into the waveform when you're on a deck. So this is the behavior of this knob. Some people prefer to open the library instantly, others prefer to use it as a zoom. Remember, you can pinch to zoom as well should you want to. So moving from the device onto this mixer specific settings here on the next tab. So the sampler can be set to output to channel 1, channel 2 or the main output by putting it on one of the channels. You can use all the channel effects and so on, but you sacrifice a channel in order to do so. The playlist deck crossover time is how long it takes to mix automatically between tracks when you're playing a whole playlist on one deck. The EQ can be set so that when you turn the EQs all the way down, it literally turns the whole track off. That is isolate mode, or you can set it to normal mode where it will leave a little bit of the track playing in both of those. These are the actual frequencies that the EQs switch between the various modes. So low and mid is the lower one and mid and high is the upper one. Smart headphone cue decides that when you load a track onto another deck, whether or not the headphones automatically switch to that track to save you having to press the cue button in order to do so. And then similarly, cue solo mode decides when you press one cue button whether the other one turns off. Split cue output decides whether when you're in split cue mode you get the whole track on the right or the left hand headphone ear cup. The other one will always be the cued track. Crossfader cut in length left and right is for scratch DJs to set the crossfader so that it works how they want it to, and you can calibrate the crossfader by clicking this button here and going through the process. Again, it's one for scratch DJs for sure. So effects here, we can set whether the effects select behavior is recall or default. Recall will always recall the previously set effects when you load a new track. Default will go back to the current defaults when you load a new track. And reset effects to default settings will just reset all your effects back to the default settings. So if you've been messing around with these, getting wild and wonderful, and you just want to put everything back to how it was, that's where to do it. So microphone and auxiliary, this is adjusting the input volume for the microphones and also how loud the microphone has to be before it cuts the music when you're using talkover. And then this is EQ for the auxiliary input, which is really nice. So you can get that sounding the same as your decks there. Services. Here we can turn on or off the engine lighting that we had a little look at earlier. We can turn on or off Ableton Link. You saw that these two things had their own buttons in the earlier menu. Ableton Link offset allows you to, a little bit like when you offset the audio from the video on your home cinema system, this allows you to get everything in sync if you are using Wi-Fi to sync up to an Ableton Link source, which you might have plugged into that auxiliary. Here's where you enable or disable the streaming services so they don't show in your source. If you don't actually have these things, there's no point having them enabled. And you can enable the Engine DJ Cloud if you've got tracks in the Dropbox there as well. And finally, this is where you check the operating system, check whether you've got the latest version of the hardware, firmware installed, and if not, this is where you download and install the hardware and get everything up to date. Just a word on streaming services as a source. There's two ways of enabling streaming services, getting your username and password in. Probably the easier way nowadays is just to go to the sources menu, tap on one and use your phone to scan here. But you can go into your Engine DJ profile and do them all at once. Beatport's a little bit different. Beatport will make you put the username and password in here in order to do that. So two ways of getting to that. And also down here, we actually have our demo tracks. If you just want to play some of those tracks that come with the unit, you've unboxed it, you haven't got any music yet, you can mess around in there until you get bored of them. And also there is the sampler content, the stuff that is on the sampler when you load it that we were listening to earlier. That's all in there as well. I do hope you've enjoyed this. We've really enjoyed bringing it to you. It's a long one. You know, we've got many tutorials just like this free here on this channel. I've linked underneath so you can find the others. However, I did say to you at the beginning that I had something for you as a reward for hanging around to the end. And that's a free copy of our book, Rock the Dance Floor, the best-selling global book on how to DJ. You know, we've been teaching DJing since 2010. We've taught over 50,000 people to do this, and I'd love you to have a copy of the book. As a thank you for watching this tutorial, head over to digitaldjtips.com and click the join link at the top, or go to this QR code here and it'll take you to the same place. Become a free member of our school. I will give you the book, and when you're ready, do consider taking our complete DJ course. It's a phenomenal investment in your DJing, and it's helped tens of thousands of people just like you to learn the 5 big areas of DJing: gear, music, mixing, performing, and success. The course takes you through everything from the beginning all the way through to playing and sharing your DJ sets. It's taught by me, and by the end of it, you will be able to DJ like a pro, whether you're new to this, whether you've always wanted to DJ and never got around to it, or whether you're returning to DJing as someone just getting into it. And of course, all the gear has changed completely since you last did it. Come and take a look at the complete DJ course on the website, where you'll see that you can buy it on its own or as part of one of our all access purchases or subscriptions. And I do hope to see you in there very soon. For now though, we're done here. You now know pretty much everything about this unit, more than pretty much everyone who even owns one, so well done. I want you though to tell me what your favorite feature is. What have you learned here that you didn't know? What have you learned that's going to change your DJing? Or what do you wish was on here that isn't? I haven't been able to cover everything. It's really useful for us to know this stuff to help me make better tutorials in the future and to understand more about how you're using your System One. So don't be shy. I'd love to hear from you down there in the comments. But meanwhile, from me, Phil, here in the Digital DJ Tips School Studio, get good, get out there, make the moments, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.